Hello, my name is Eric, and I am an addict.
Hi, Eric.
You did that very well.
You're not the first addict. Before. I know.
So I'm addicted to this new stupid game. It's so.
You have a habit of doing this sort of thing.
Oh,
what is this game? What is it this time?
So this is. Do you remember Cityville on Facebook?
Yes.
Remember this? Okay, well, it's that. It's basically that. Cityville doesn't exist anymore. And it's one of those that wants to suck up all your money. I have not paid this game a dime, so I am proud of that.
Well, that's something.
But it's one of these things where you start off with this tiny little plot of land and a farmhouse and a house and a something else, and you have a little bit of money and you have a little bit of this, and so you have to build police stations and fire stations and kind of build out your town so that everyone's taken care of. And then once you start making a little bit more money, you can expand your town. I am to the point now where my town is so huge. I have this whole hipster area that's all like condos and cool restaurants and bars. Over here is my whole industrial sector where I have all my factories and the prison. And, but I put the baseball stadium over there because, baseball stadiums are often in that part of town. I have a whole farming community off to the northwest, which, I have to go in every day and collect all my money from my cherry orchards and my fields.
Okay.
What I will say about this is it's not collaborative. It's not social. I don't have any other friends who are playing this game, but it got me from a flight from San Francisco to Philly. I swear to God, it felt like that flight took a half an hour, and I spent all my time buying land and building condos.
See, here's what I'm going to say about that. I'm sorry that you're addicted to that and you need to get over it. I could never get into those. And the reason is within 2 hours of me trying to, because you have to get the farm has to feed the people and you have to get the utilities and the electricity. Everybody died within the first 30 minutes. So I don't worry about that.
Attention. Top surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Top surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to operating room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
Welcome to Popperation. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And we are doing an episode this week based on...
Don't you forget about me.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Keep it. Based on a New Yorker article that Molly Ringwald wrote back in April, that I immediately put on Facebook, and you saw it and was like, oh my God, this was, really well written, first of all. She's a really good writer.
She is, and she's been honing her skills as writer and producer and that sort of thing since the 80s. I mean, she went off to France and whatever. I think you have a little bit mini bio about Molly Ringwald.
A little. I mean, just basically a little kind of what she's been up to lately in her career. But she wrote this really great piece about the 3 movies she made with John Hughes. 2 of them were written and directed by John Hughes. The third was written by John Hughes and directed by somebody else. But they're the 3 movies that she is probably still, even though she's still working today, probably most famous for.
Oh, for sure.
16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Pretty in Pink.
Correct.
And she had some interesting things to say, both good and bad. I mean, it wasn't a complete, I'm ashamed of these movies, because she's not.
Well, here's the deal. So what happens is that we're in this era of hashtag Me Too, hashtag No More.
Hashtag Time's Up.
Yes, all of that. So all of this spotlight is going on directors and producers and men in show business and how they treat women.
Yeah.
And, so we're dealing mostly with people that are alive.
Yeah.
But there are people dead. And we've talked about Alfred Hitchcock, one of them, who were really good artists and did some really good, iconic art. But they weren't the nicest people in relationship to dealing with women and females and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so Molly, this was kind of a reaction, I think. I think it started her thinking, and she's going, holy crap. Let me go back to when I was doing movies as a teenager.
Well, and it started because she says she did an episode of This American Life, and NPR's Ira Glass interviewed her about watching The Breakfast Club with her daughter.
Okay.
And so she references this in her article that, she was watching The Breakfast Club with her 10-year-old daughter. And she says, I know that 10 years old is way too young to be watching The Breakfast Club. But her daughter insisted that all of her friends had seen it anyway, and she really didn't want to watch it with them because her mom was in it. So she really wanted to watch it with Mom. And Molly Ringwald just figured, oh, well, if there's any uncomfortable questions, at least I'll be here to answer them, right? So she watched the movie with her daughter, and her daughter was not fazed. Stuff either went over her head or, didn't faze her too much.
2017 or 18, whenever they watched it. I mean, yeah.
And Molly said, I was affected. I was fazed where my daughter was not because she'd forgotten a lot of the things that were in this movie. And then she went back and looked at kind of all three of these John Hughes movies that she made that really made her famous, 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Pretty in Pink, and just said there's a lot of problematic stuff in there, and there's a lot of wonderful stuff in there. This whole thing kicked off because the Criterion Collection, which is this, very Tony kind of, look at only the best films get included in the Criterion Collection, and they just released their kind of super version of The Breakfast Club. So it got included in this like classic of film. I mean, it's kind of reached this level. And there's some problematic stuff in there. Yes. There's more problematic stuff, I think, in 16 Candles. And we'll get into kind of what about this is kind of problematic. But first we want to really set the scene.
But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, I call it the teen trilogy, John Hughes teen trilogy. Now, having said that, understand he had themes. And so these are not the only three teenager centered movies he did by any means. But because he did have some, like Molly Ringwald was in all three, so it feels like, and they were three of the first that he did.
Yeah, and they go together because of her. Yes. She's really the unifying force. And at one point in this article, she said, people called me John Hughes' muse, and she said, I probably was for a time. But he wrote he wrote The Breakfast Club, cast her as Claire, then wrote 16 Candles, even though it was released first, wrote it specifically for Molly Ringwald, and wrote Pretty in Pink specifically for Molly Ringwald after The Breakfast Club.
Okay, so we'll get into that when we get into all of that. But understand, he was not just... That's not all he did. He was a writer. He was a producer. He was a director. He has 50 credits as a writer. Yeah. And they include National Lampoon's Vacation and all of the stuff after, all the other vacations except European. He did not know that was happening, interestingly enough, until it was out. He saw promos for European Vacation. And he went, oh, I see we're doing that, are we? Mr. Mom, if you recall the 80s, and Michael Keaton's big breakout movie. Yep. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, teenager, I get that. Some Kind of Wonderful.
More teenagers.
Which was also, I think, also trying to be a boys' version of like Pretty in Pink.
Probably.
Weird Science.
More teenagers.
And that was, I hated that movie. It was so, I hated it back then.
Yeah,
it was awful.
It had very misogynist tones,
it was
even
awful.
In the 80s.
Uncle Buck, which to an extent holds up still, just FYI, John Candy, classic.
Okay.
She's Having a Baby, which is when he was trying to get away from teenager and get to that growing up in the 20s kind of thing.
I loved that movie.
That's
in
funny.
The day.
I did not like
in
it.
The day. But here's what I think, and this is also a theme that runs through a lot of John Hughes movies. He knows how to put together a soundtrack.
Okay, we're going to get to that.
We are going to get there. To that. I know. Stop shushing me.
Okay, well you're getting ahead of the thing.
No, I'm not, because we're going to cut all this while she's shushing me.
No, we're not.
John Hughes knows how to make a soundtrack album, and the soundtrack to She's Having a Baby is phenomenal.
Is it really? Because
it's one of the best albums that was like put together. It is part of the soundtrack of my high school
Pretty in Pink to me
youth.
is an awesome soundtrack.
Also really good, but She's Having a Baby, I think, is better.
Okay,
I'm just going to put that out there.
Okay, I'll have to listen to that. Home Alone and all the ones after that. You remember that, Macaulay Culkin. Beethoven. Now, what's funny about Beethoven is he didn't do it under John Hughes' name. He did it under his pseudonym, Edmond Dantes.
Which that doesn't sound like a pseudonym at all, John. Whatever, Edmond Dantes.
You know who that is? That's the Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, please.
Okay,
because you're ashamed because you wrote a dog movie.
Hell,
you know what?
yes.
You did it for the money. Just everyone does. Shut up.
So producer, 23 credits. And that included Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Which we talked about. back in
Yes,
our
we did.
Thanksgiving episode of last year.
Dutch, which actually got critical acclaim but didn't do crap in the box office.
I don't even. What is Dutch?
That's what's his face from Modern Family and Married with Children. Who's the old guy?
Ed O'Neill?
Yes, he
Okay.
was in that.
All right.
And yeah. Anyway, Curly Sue.
I remember her.
Yeah.
I didn't see the movie, but I remember those annoying commercials.
And 101 Dalmatians.
Which was adorable. The Glenn Close version, the live action? Yeah.
Yes. And then he also produced all the Home Alones, the Beethovens, and the Vacations.
Yep.
And then as a director, he only did 8.
You know, it's funny. When I think about Pretty in Pink, I think about it as a John Hughes movie. I was actually surprised to discover in my research for this episode that he, in fact, did not direct it.
But he wrote it. So it still is a John Hughes movie.
And he produced it.
Yes.
And it's all over John Hughes. I mean, this director knew he was making a John Hughes movie. And it was his first feature, Howard Deutsch.
Yeah.
But it just feels like a John Hughes movie. Oh, it's John Hughes.
It's like some of those old ones that Steven Spielberg produced.
Uh-huh.
You forget that Steven Spielberg didn't direct them. He just produced them.
But he was probably on set all the time. And whoever with a poor schmuck who was directing and was like, Steven Spielberg's looking right over my shoulder, so I need to be as Spielbergy as possible.
Exactly. I think that's what Deutsch was doing. It was as Hughesian as it possibly could be. But yeah, the ones he directed were 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, She's Having a Baby, Uncle Buck, and Curly Sue. Now, the last
has some great, that's a list with some great movies and some not so great movies.
Oh, my Lord. I'm sorry. I did not care for Curly Sue.
Didn't see it.
No, great loss. His last 2 movies, he just produced them. It was Reach the Rock in 1998 and The Newport South in 2001.
Never heard of him.
No, you didn't. But it's interesting because both of them, and again, remember that the big stuff of teen stuff happened in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
So now he's in the late 90s, the early 2000s, still doing high school kid stuff. At some point, I think you get too far away from that age to understand, that teenagedom changes every, 5 to 7 years now. At one point, it was every 25 years.
Yeah.
But now it changes, and maybe even faster with social media. Maybe it's every 3 or 4 years. You're, one kid's perception of what is high school changes from the next kid.
Yeah, it can be very easy to be out of touch.
I think that's what happened. That's why we never heard of them, because it was high school kids trying to figure stuff out. 2 different ones, both dramas.
And I don't think we've mentioned yet that John is no longer with us.
Oh, we have not. Sorry. We're going to talk about him in the past tense
because the reason his last credit is in 2001, he died not long after.
He died in 2009. He was only 59 years old.
Yeah. So as we're talking about this, and as Molly Ringwald was writing this article about, looking back at these 3 films that she made with him, it's done with a he's gone. We're not trying to she wasn't trying to, and I don't think we're trying to either, just lambast this guy who's no longer here to defend himself. But there is still some problematic stuff in there that watching these iconic 80s movies with a 2018 lens brings up some stuff that was not there back in the 80s.
Well, I think what you want to do when you look at some of this stuff, and again, I'm not trying to rationalize or excuse anything, but I do understand as a woman, and the bigger issues in this, in my opinion, is the misogyny and how girls are treated and talked about and, frankly, used. In that, I think it was indicative, which is why they were popular. It was indicative of the time.
Yeah.
So he had and people at the time said he has a pulse on, what's going on with our kids. He did. Now, having said that, let me clarify. He had a pulse on what was going on with white middle-class American kids.
Yes.
You've got to narrow it heterosexual. I mean, you've got to narrow it all the way down to that pinpoint.
Who he was as a kid.
Correct.
He had a pretty good
idea. And who he was is he graduated from high school in Northbrook, Illinois. Almost everything takes place in Chicago or a Chicago suburb.
Yep.
And he started writing for National Lampoon in the 1970s. And just so you know, if you look at that stuff from the National Lampoon in the 70s and when they were starting out, it is misogynistic and awful.
Yeah, you don't have to read it, actually. We're going to put Molly Ringwald's article on the Facebook page, and she describes it well enough that she basically read it so you don't have to.
So, I mean, the National Lampoon, and again, it a lot of famous writers, directors, producers, whatever, have come from that whole bank of writers. That's where they got their start. Pulitzer Prize winners, for God's sake. But it was a boys' club.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not nice to women anyway, but that's there. And then, as I said before, his pseudonym was Edmond Dantes, and there were quite a few. When you go onto IMDb and look, there's quite a few that he's like as Edmond Dantes, the Count of Monte Cristo. And again, I think it's because he didn't want it to be a John Hughes movie.
Yeah, he wanted to,
But
stretch.
So in 1999, and this is just one quote of his, because again, he's not here to speak for himself or anything, but he did have a quote, and it was kind of why he did these teenager movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, my generation, basically he's a baby boomers.
Yeah.
My generation had sucked up so much attention, and here were these kids struggling for an identity. They were forgotten. And he was right. Those kids didn't have nobody talked about the teenagers in the 1980s until John Hughes started talking about the teenagers.
Still nobody talks about our generation, Stacey. I mean, Generation X is kind of this interesting generation that's sandwiched in between the baby boomers and the millennials. And as soon as
Generation Y is in there too.
Well,
in between
that's the millennials.
X and
Millennials and Generation Y are just two different words for the same thing.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, look at me learning stuff.
So we didn't know what to call the millennials, so we just said, the next generation, we'll just call them Generation Y. And then the millennials said, no, we're not going to be named after you because that's stupid. But both of those generations are so huge that Generation X, first of all, did not span that long of a time, and secondly, it's kind of in between these baby booms, so the birth rate was actually not that high.
Correct, because the millennials are the baby boomers.
Exactly, they are the kids of the baby boomers. Generally, and even though I'm a child of baby boomers, I was just my parents had me.
My
young.
parents were born before the baby boom. See,
Yeah.
they weren't. There is an in between generation as well.
No, my parents were early baby boomers who had their kids early, so I ended up in Generation X. But, even like I work in the corporate world talking about diversity a lot, and so much conversation gets taken up by baby boomers and millennials because there just aren't that many Gen Xers that we've been forgotten still, and I think that, going back to what you said about misogyny, I just want to make this really quick point. One of the things that Molly Ringwald said in this article, which again we'll post on our Facebook wall, that I thought was such she was very loving towards John Hughes, even though she was criticizing some of his work. And she did point out that, neither before nor since really has Hollywood taken a look at the life of real high school girls and taken them seriously. We have a lot of movies that are headlined by young women now, but they're usually involving like dystopian Hunger Games or navigating should I date the werewolf or the vampire. They're not really real stories about young women navigating life. And yeah, they're young, white, middle-class women, and maybe the plot line is straight, and maybe the plot line is my parents forgot my birthday, or is the cute boy going to ask me to prom? They might seem a little flimsy. That's a word that Molly used. But they're real. When you're a high school girl living in a Chicago suburb, and yeah, you might be white and middle class and straight and all of those things, but those are the biggest problems in your life at the moment. And no one before or since really has taken those inner lives seriously at all. So we do owe John Hughes something for that.
Well, I think,
and he was not a girl. He was not a woman. He had no idea that some of the stuff that he was talking about, that he'd taken probably from his long career at National Lampoon, were not going to age very well.
Well, and also, I think, the fact that there were women involved in this production, and, it was just the way things were. So there wasn't a lot of pushback at the time because nobody knew better. That sounds ridiculous, but it doesn't. What I will say, though, I agree, but here's what. Okay, yes, Generation X, you're right. There's not a huge legacy there, okay, but except for the music. 80s music has always, at one point, I remember in the 90s and then in the early 2000s, like there were radio stations that would have 80s Friday night. Now there are stations that are all 80s. I mean, 80s music made a comeback. It was derided by the baby boomers. It was totally insulted and, techno pop, whatever you want to say. But now it's at any kind of celebration, you're listening to some 80s music.
Yeah, I maintain to this day, and it's just like part of it is like I've become my dad because my dad always listened to songs that were popular when he was in high school. And so for him, that was the 50s. And so I listened to a lot of 50s music growing up.
Yes, me too.
I listen to a lot of 80s music to this day, and I maintain that so much about our culture was so bad and wrong and the worst of America in the 80s. You know, the whole greed is good kind of, you know, thing that was going on there. But and TV was, you know, a lot of it didn't age well. Many movies did not age very well. The music has aged really well. 80s music is still, by and large, pretty listenable.
Well, it went away and then it came back. And I think because it was fun and there was a lot of escapism in it.
Yep.
There's some real stuff. U2 put out some really good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
David Bowie. I mean, you had your guys there that at the time, I remember David Bowie getting crap because they said he sold out.
Yeah.
But now you're not going to hear anybody say that.
Well, and the Joshua Tree, you know, I mean, there was a lot of socially conscious stuff going on.
There was stuff going on. And so you have that, but you also have my favorite. I'm a hashtag Duranny babe. Duran Duran. I was into the new British invasion.
Yeah, I mostly just, you know, I was a closeted high school student who just thought John Taylor was just dreamy. So that was part of it. He kind of is.
He still is. He has aged maybe the best of them. Of the Duran's people.
Another show for another time, but yes.
It is another show for another time.
So before we take a break, a little about Molly.
Yeah. Because here's the thing is that I read where on the 16 Candles, he got a lot of, he was thinking of, I believe, Ali Sheedy for that or something. Yes, he was. And he got the headshot. No, maybe I'm confused.
Okay, here's the story I know.
Okay, because go on.
Is that when Molly Ringwald looked at the script for The Breakfast Club, she had not yet met John Hughes, but for her first contact with him was reading the script for The Breakfast Club, and she loved it, and she really saw herself as this basket case kind of role. So she wanted the Ali Sheedy part. So she originally went up for the Ali Sheedy part in The Breakfast Club. And John Hughes, I think, wisely said, I want to see you for Claire. And you know, I think Molly was probably just like, but I'm not like your typical blonde, you know, like most popular girl in school kind of archetype, you know, but he said, but it can work. And there's something about you. You're a Claire. And so they got to know each other through that. The studios were hesitant to let John Hughes make his directorial debut with The Breakfast Club because it's an unusual movie. It really kind of reads like a play, more so than a typical kind of plot-driven movie, and we'll get into all that. So when he met Molly Ringwald, he was like, there's a story idea that's been in my mind for a while, and you're the girl, and I'm going to write it for you. And he wrote 16 Candles for Molly Ringwald.
Right, but what I heard is that they hadn't met, that he had got her headshot.
Okay.
And he was fascinated by it. He didn't want her for the crazy in Breakfast Club, but he wrote 16 Candles based on her headshot.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
That they had not met yet.
Okay.
But yes, you're right. There are some cast changes, role changes that things were going in one direction and then they were changed on several, if not all three of these movies.
And then I think, if I have the timing right, between the time that 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club were filmed, he wrote Pretty in Pink. Also for Molly Ringwald.
Yes.
Yeah,
it was
specifically for her.
Yeah.
So she was a muse for him, at least for two of
these three teen trilogies.
And two of his like most famous writing. When you think about a John Hughes movie, you know, Ferris Bueller comes up as pretty iconic, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. But then you start thinking about these Molly Ringwald teen movies.
16 Candles, I think, is the first one that people think of because it was the first time we heard his name and the first time we were introduced to Molly Ringwald.
Yeah, and I probably think of The Breakfast Club only because it is so different. Not only so different from all the things that he'd done, but just a really different film. I was shocked, even as a high school sophomore, that people loved this movie as much as I did. I saw it and I remember thinking to myself, I love this, but everyone else is going to hate it. And it became the biggest. I mean, when it hit cable, when I was a high school sophomore, everyone was quoting it. It's all anybody could talk about was The Breakfast Club. And I didn't have cable at the time, but I had seen it in the theaters. And so I knew what folks were talking about. And it was a phenomenon. So before we take a break, a little bit about, and not a lot, it's just that Molly is still with us. She's still working, doing a lot of TV now. She has 63 credits on IMDb as an actress. And the most recent thing that she's probably really well known for is 6 episodes on Riverdale. Do you watch Riverdale?
No, my daughters do.
Okay, so when her role is Mary Andrews, and I'm kind of thinking, is she Archie's mom?
Could be.
I bet she is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
She's
so she's a redhead. She's Mrs. Andrews. So she's been on 6 episodes. There have been like 30. So she's not, she's a frequent guest star as Archie's mom. But she was in, I think, every single episode of a series called The Secret Life of the American Teenager.
She was the mom. She was the mom of the American Teenager.
Yeah, that ran from 2008 to 2013. So a nice long run for a TV show. And I remember when she was cast in that, it was like, of course, you would want Molly Ringwald to be in any show that talks about the American teenager, because she was a poster girl for
Correct.
She was on Time magazine as like the quintessential American teen. She was huge.
The idea of the blonde being what you wanted to be changed. Redheads became cool because of Molly Ringwald.
Yeah.
And that I say that 100%.
Yeah.
I know that is a fact. It was blondes and brunettes until Molly Ringwald, and suddenly everybody wanted to be a redhead.
But even when you see her in these 3 movies, she is somebody that you can believe is super popular. You totally believe her as the most popular girl in the school in The Breakfast Club, but also in Pretty in Pink as the girl that the popular kids mostly deride. She has a look that could go either way.
Correct.
And she was, I saw her becoming a better actor, actually, in these 3 movies. When you watch them all back to back,
most definitely.
You see her get better and better at her craft. But she also was, even when, her line readings were a little clunky in 16 Candles, she was incredibly endearing. You couldn't help but be drawn to her, and you liked her.
She was real.
Yeah.
She was very real.
Yeah.
And so you're exactly right. She was not great in 16 Candles. She was good, and she was real, and she was believable. And so it was fine.
Yeah.
But she got better each one. You're exactly right.
Yeah. So when we come back, we are going to take a look at these 3 movies and really dive a little bit deeper into them. Today we're talking about the John Hughes / Molly Ringwald teen trilogy. This is Popperation. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey. So the first time I was introduced to Molly Ringwald was 1984, 16 Candles. Absolutely. It was a little young for me. I was in my early 20s, but I loved it so much. And I couldn't believe that it had captured exactly what middle-class white American high schooldom was about.
Of course, at the time, you probably thought, oh my God, he knows all about high school.
That's exactly what I thought.
Now we know to say white, middle-class, straight American
watching it in 2018, watching it in 2016 or 17, whenever I made my children watch it for the first time, it was you sit there and you see all of the glaring issues that why you would need to change things if you did it now. The cast was Molly Ringwald, as we've said, Anthony Michael Hall, I believe, and I believe this was introducing Anthony Michael Hall, that he got an introducing.
No, I think that was Lampoon's Vacation, I think.
Oh, you're crap. You're right.
Yeah,
you're my bad. Okay,
yeah. So
my bad.
He knew him. But
that's right, because he got this because he was in Vacation.
But what's interesting about his role in this is he doesn't have a name. He's one of the 3 leads of the movie, but he's in the credits. He's the geek.
Correct, because there was a little bit of a weirdness about this because his name really is Ted Farmer, but in the movie people call him Farmer Ted because when teachers are calling the roll, they'll do last name first. Mm-hmm. And so that's what everybody, started, because it would be Farmer Ted, and everybody started calling him Farmer Ted. But so it depends on what version of the movie you see as to whether it's the geek or Farmer Ted.
Okay.
Interestingly enough.
They call him Farmer Ted in the movie, and sometimes somebody messes up and calls him Farmer Fred, and it gets confusing. But when you look at the final credits, I just rented it on iTunes the other night. And the geek, Anthony Michael Hall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Michael Scheffling is the love interest
He's pretty.
And I don't know whether he had another role after that. I think he ended up getting married and going away doing something. He's not an actor now.
No, he's not. He stopped in 91, but he had a role. He was the boy that Winona Ryder was pining for in
yes,
Mermaids.
he was in Mermaids. I forgot about that.
Yeah, so that was like a good 6 years after
and that was probably one of the last things he did.
It was. He had another credit in 91, and that was it.
Yeah, he didn't enjoy it, but he wasn't great.
Yeah. He was pretty. He served the purpose because Jake Ryan is not a character with a really difficult arc to play. Let's say. I
didn't realize he had an arc.
Well, there you go. He didn't have much of one.
I don't think he had an arc. I think it was a straight line.
He was there to be pretty. He was there. He
was the guy, the unattainable guy. That is who he was. Is the unattainable guy.
Decent guy.
No, he's a decent guy.
Because you wanted him to get together with so-and-so, except he traded his drunk girlfriend for
correct.
He was
like...
which we get into that later. But the whole thing is that, all he needed to do was sit there so she could pine after him.
Yes.
And he had this horrible, horrible, horrible girlfriend, Haviland Morris, who we will talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was bored with her because she was shallow, and he was interested in Molly because he could see depth in her, despite the fact that he never spoken to her. I mean, he was just this like boring, decent, good-looking guy.
And it was very much a cliche, and it was very much BS because the idea that, I'm 18 now, I want to settle down. Shut up. I mean, that's part of my problem watching it in the 21st century is I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You sound like you're 32. Nobody does that.
Well,
you still want to get laid. Come on.
Yeah, he wants to get laid, and he wants to be in love. I think that's what I took from that is that he was ready to actually have his heart feel something.
Keep in mind, you still do have to.
But again, it was just a teenage girl fantasy.
Yes,
that's all
correct.
he was. Yeah.
And I mentioned another cast member in here, John Cusack, because he's a very small part in this. He plays one of Farmer Ted's minions.
Yep.
And I mean, very small part. But of course, John Cusack went on to do his own thing.
Sure.
And that's
it's funny. It's hard reconciling him as an uber geek in this just because, he went on to like do High Fidelity where he was like the cool guy.
Well, he also did The Sure Thing, which was another teen thing, although it was college
but
freshmen.
This movie's got a ton of people like that. Joan Cusack is also in this movie
which is
as
his
head
sister.
care girl.
Yes.
They're not brother-sister in the movie.
No.
You don't think.
They don't. I don't think they have any
They
kind
don't have
of
any
connection.
scenes at all.
Yeah.
Jamie Gertz is one of Haviland Morris's little minions.
Mm-hmm.
There's little cameos like that all over the place.
No, it's full of people that you're like, oh, I know them kind of moments.
And they have two lines because they don't really,
Correct.
This is before they hit it.
So basically the plot quickly is a 16-year-old's birthday is forgotten by her family because her sister's getting married the next day. And then that evening she goes to a high school dance.
That's the plot.
That's it. That really is it. Seriously. Now, clearly an hour and a half kind of bunch of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And again, it's entertaining.
Yeah. And she is pining after the most popular boy in school. Meanwhile,
there's a lot of teen drama.
Farmer Ted is lusting after her. Mm-hmm. So she's being chased as she is doing a pretty bad job of chasing. But, supposedly she is, trying to work up the nerve to talk to this boy. And of course, in typical, teen fantasy fashion, she doesn't have to do much because she's just so winsome that he kind of comes after her anyway.
So we were talking about what happened here. So I remember I watched the movie. I went to the movie, and then afterwards I liked it so much. My dad was a big movie fan, so I went home, and I was in college, and I said, "Okay, let's go see this. I think you're going to really like this, Dad." So I took my dad to go see it. He liked it. He liked it fine.
Okay.
He had a problem with one scene, and I remember at the time, so the scene he had a problem with near the beginning. So she's gone all day. Everybody forgot about her birthday. There is a dance that evening. She wasn't going to go to it, but she doesn't want to stay with her grandparents who are hanging out at the house because the next day is her sister's wedding.
And her grandparents are terrible.
They're ridiculous people. They're every cliche of everybody's they're awful. So she doesn't want to hang out with them. She's like, I have to go to this dance. It's an assignment.
We're being graded
on it. So they say, well, and they happen to bring a foreign exchange student. Long Duck Dong is his name.
And I'm not even going to laugh at that because it's just...
It is, and Gede Watanabe. I think he was like 32 at the time or something like
Yeah.
that. But he talks about how, I mean, he was trying to make a living, man.
Yeah.
He was
a young
it was
Asian
a job.
actor trying to, make bank. So he got this job.
So he got this job. And it is a cliche from the moment you meet him, from the moment they say long duck dong.
And every time they either mention him or see him, you hear a Chinese gong.
Oh, it's
background.
awful.
I mean, it's just
awful. The only thing he's
terrible.
missing are the Coke bottle glasses.
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
Well, I would say he's a stereotype in a lot of horrible ways. He's also apparently a sexual stunner, like a Superman in the sack.
Well, so says the large jock woman.
Well,
I don't know.
but hey, she has the best night of her life. So, there are some that he does decide to, but he only veers away from the stereotype for a laugh.
Correct.
It's not to deepen.
But he's the stereotype.
Long Duck Dong doesn't have much of an arc to play either.
No. Now, so what happens is the grandparents say, well, why don't you take Long Duck Dong with you to the dance? And immediately there is a close-up of Molly, and her mouth looks open, drops open. She looks shocked. And then she closes her mouth, and it was like, fine. But I remember my dad saying, there's no way that she would have that reaction in front of him at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that would happen. And what I said, and this is again, he didn't get that, yes, outwardly, she would not have made that face.
Uh-huh.
But inwardly, that is what we were looking at. We were looking at how she felt emotionally.
Uh-huh.
And which is why, for me, it was okay that she made that face.
Yeah.
And I think that was a difference in a generational looking at this and me going, I know she wouldn't have done that because that would have hurt his feelings. But that's how she felt was, you are fucking kidding me.
Yeah.
I have to take this guy.
And and John Hughes does that a lot. John Hughes actually has, this habit of every once in a while allowing his actors to look straight into the camera.
Correct.
When there's been no hint that
Farmer
that's a
Ted
device.
did it at least once, if not twice.
Yes, and Ducky does it at the very end of Pretty in Pink as well. So occasionally he will do a shot which is just, this is the inner life of this person.
I think that was the whole thing.
All I want to say now is that was the one scene that your dad had a problem with?
Yes, because it was the 80s and it was normal. And my dad was a white heterosexual guy from the Midwest.
Yeah.
I mean, that was how things were. But I think that what 16 Candles did and what it started a reputation for John Hughes was so that audience members would go, John Hughes, and they would go, is that he got it. He got that she was horrified. He got all of these emotionals. He seemed to know what teenagers were really feeling in the normalcy. He also seemed to know the pressures that they were facing, which is what happened when we move into the next of the trilogy.
Well, okay, there's a lot to say about 16 Candles.
There is, but I mean, we were just, okay.
Yeah. So a few other things about 16 Candles, though, that I think we do have to mention before we go, is the date rape, right? Which is, basically Haviland Morris, the horrible, horrible girlfriend, is drunk, gets traded for a pair of underwear at the end of the movie. I won't go into the plot reasons as to why that happens. I'm just going to leave that there, that a drunk girl gets traded for a pair of underwear to the geek. So the geek gets Jake's dad's Rolls Royce and a drunk prom queen in the back of his seat. And she's so bombed, she doesn't know what's going on. And in the morning, it's clear that they did it. And she also gets a crotch shot, like the one that Molly was talking about in The Breakfast Club. They also made sure that at one point there was a close-up of Haviland Morris's underwear because her dress was hiked up over her head while she was in the car.
There is a shower scene where it is not Haviland, it's her character, but it's a body double because Molly and her friend are talking and saying that she has, the best breast, whatever, or bigger breasts.
Yep.
And Haviland didn't in real life. Her body was just regular like everybody else's, but they got a body double. But again, the idea is, why do you have to have a nude shower scene of a teenage girl in your movie, John Hughes?
Exactly.
Because,
Haviland Morris was 23 when they made this movie, but her character is a high school senior.
Correct.
And everyone who was watching that movie and every horny teenage boy who went to see this because they were dragged there by their girlfriend got a chance to ogle a high school senior's naked body in the shower. It's weird.
It is. Looking at it through a 21st century lens, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I bring this up because Molly Ringwald actually interviewed Haviland Morris for this New Yorker article that she did. And originally, Haviland Morris was like,
this is
I
fascinating.
didn't have a huge problem with this because she was so drunk. And Molly was just like, okay, but it's not okay to rape somebody just because they're, and rape here doesn't mean violent. I'm sure she quote unquote said, oh yeah, do me baby. But when you're bombed out of your mind and you can't remember it in the morning, you cannot give consent.
No.
And so it was non-consensual.
Correct.
Even though according to the John Hughes fantasy, she loved it the next morning and she has no regrets.
That was an awkward scene.
Which is just a whole other thing.
It's an awkward scene when she says, he's like, did you like it? And she says, I think I did.
No, she says, I have a feeling I did. That was the exact line.
Either way, but it's like,
well, that's because,
you can't remember.
But Molly made a great point in her article. She was like, it was a feeling because it wasn't a thought, because thoughts are what conscious people have, and she wasn't.
Yeah, that's very well put. Right.
So it's just one of those things. It's like, that is one of the things that now I look at it and I'm like, we just have a better understanding of what consent is.
But as you said, you're talking about Haviland. She came back.
She did. So after this interview, she called Molly the next day and said, you're right. The more I've been thinking about it, this conversation really opened my eyes to something that I did 3 decades ago that now I have very different feelings about, because Molly and Haviland at this point were both moms. And Molly put it to her finally, mom to mom, if your daughter got a little drunk one night, is this what you would want to have happen to her? It wouldn't be okay. And Molly also tells a story about how she got a little drunk one night as a young woman and ended up in some producer's apartment. And thank God for a friend of hers who yanked her out of there, because something might have happened to her as well. There could have been a whole other #MeToo story.
But again, this goes back to, in the 80s, that's how stuff was.
Oh, yeah.
So you just kind of went, oh, yeah, she was drunk. And then at the end, as long as she liked it or thinks she liked it.
Not even in the 80s. In 2018, Stormy Daniels said, well, I brought Donald Trump back to my room and it was kind of my fault, so I guess I had to have sex with him. She said that on national television in 2018. So times have, they've changed-ish. But this whole rape culture thing is still very much around.
Right. So again, but that was, so it's really, yes, that's very, but there's a lot of, and here's what I want to say overarching, which I was going to talk about a little later too, is there's just a lack of diversity as well.
Oh, yeah.
So you have the misogyny, you have the, oh my gosh, the poor Getty Watanabe. I mean, that was just awful. The
so demeaning.
Racial crap. And then, as I said, it's aside from him, I think he's the only POC.
The only other thing in the whole movie is they're talking at the beginning. She's talking with her friend about the dream birthday and having a pink Trans Am and a guy. And she was like, black. And the friend is horrified and says, a black guy? And she says, no, a black Trans Am, a pink guy.
You're right. I forgot about that.
Ugh.
Oh, it's awful. It really is awful.
Ugh.
But again, we just kind of slid right over it in 1984.
And we thought that was clever dialogue. That was just clever.
Yeah.
That wasn't racist. That was just clever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what was insulting about it?
And there were no black people around, so there was nobody
to get hurt.
Probably no black people in the theater.
Probably weren't. Okay, so now we go to the next one, which, as you said, was really written first.
Yep.
But came out, was produced afterwards. Breakfast Club.
Came out in 1985.
Correct. And it
hit cable in 1986. I remember that.
That is so fast, man.
Because that's really when, fast. And I'm a military kid, so I actually saw it I was a freshman in high school, saw it in Rhode Island in the theater, moved to Hawaii, and then halfway through the school year, everyone starts talking about this movie that I saw a year ago, because they hadn't seen it in the theaters because it was this weird experimental thing. All over cable, people wanted to see this cast, and it is a terrific story.
It's an amazing idea. And as you said, it was written kind of like a play, which actually, after it came out, John Hughes was asked to write it as a play so that high schools could do it.
Did they ever?
I don't know. Probably somebody did. Somebody outside of Chicago did.
Probably, but it's not. I mean, it's a movie. It's enough of a movie that it probably would be very difficult to stage. As a play, all those running through the hallways would be kind of difficult.
You totally have to change some of that.
So you'd have to change some of that stuff.
But I think the thing about the Breakfast Club, the idea can be modern of it having this detention hall Saturday where these kids, the different, quote, diverse kinds of kids. Yeah. Interesting enough, they're all middle class white, but whatever. Straight. In a room all day, and what do they do, and how do they connect with each other? But this particular movie, 1985, it is very much 1985.
Yeah. It is, and it still works. I mean, it works as a period piece.
It works as a period piece. It does not date well if you try to, bring it.
But as a period piece, I will contend it works really well.
As a period piece, it was exactly, it was his finger on the pulse of the white, straight, Anglo-Saxon, middle-class American.
And yet I'll keep pulling back to this article. Molly Ringwald does mention in her piece a black gay friend of hers who said to her, "The Breakfast Club meant the world to me. It probably saved my life." And she was like, "What?
Why?
You were
How?
not represented in this movie at all." But she said it was just saying that I wasn't the only kid who felt lonely. I wasn't the only kid who felt misunderstood. And quite frankly, if you're a black gay person watching most American movies in 1985, you have to learn how to place yourself into stories where you're not necessarily visible.
You have to connect yourself to one of the white
So person. He did it, but it showed, I mean, it was really about, and even though, yes, all of these kids were white and they were all straight and they weren't all middle class. Two of the kids were shown to be, on the wrong side of the tracks. There was socioeconomic diversity certainly in that room. But they all belong to, with the exception of Ali Sheedy, who probably had no friends. She says she has no friends. They all belong to different social cliques that would never have mixed or spoken in the halls of the high school. And so there it was. I mean, it was what makes us different in a room full of people depends on the room of people you're in. But they were 5 different kids who came from 5 different corners of that particular high school.
And again, as I said, the plot was basically it's detention on one Saturday, and it basically turns into an 8 to 10 hour therapy session for these 5 kids.
And the walls come down, basically.
It's Molly Ringwald, Emilio Estevez, Charlie Sheen's brother. How's that? I bet he loves that. Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, and Ali Sheedy. Fun fact, Anthony Michael Hall had a growth spurt during this movie. So Judd Nelson talks about how the beginning of filming, Anthony Michael Hall is shorter than he is. Uh-huh. By the end of it, he was taller, so they had to rework some of the camera angles.
How long did it take to film this movie?
Well, how fast was his growth spurt?
I guess. I mean, Anthony Michael Hall is a very different looking man than he was
He's very different looking.
Because he's a huge guy.
And he had an awkward period. He was really cute in 16 Candles, and even in this one. Uh-huh. Then he had a weird, when he was doing Weird Science, and again, part of it was the hair. It was bad hair. Yeah. But he had an awkward phase in his 20s, and then he got to where he was good looking again. Yeah. But he still looks very different.
Yeah, he's like from childhood. Big, studly guy now, and he was like a little wimpy,
weenie thing. But I mean, I think it was groundbreaking in that it was going further into that idea of what do teenagers think now? Yep. What are they dealing with? We as parents and adults say, you have it easy. When I was growing up, I had to walk, back and forth in the snow or whatever the hell your story is. But this was really having these kids talk about the pressures they feel. And I remember being so moved by how well, again, keep in mind where I was coming from, how well John had uncovered this. And I thought every parent, my walking out, I was like, every adult needs to see this.
Yes, I thought the same thing.
Because they need to understand it's not easy being a teenager. And
my dad had to take me to this movie because it was R-rated and I couldn't go by myself. And he enjoyed it. He walked out of it and he was just like, I actually learned a lot about he asked me, he's like, was this real? Did you find it real? Mm-hmm. Because if this is real, I had no idea what was going on.
Exactly. And I think that is what we talked about earlier, in that here is this generation that nobody's listening to because they're not big enough to have this majority yelling session or people representing them. And here was John Hughes saying, you might want to listen to them because they've got issues as well. Uh-huh. And they may not be big issues. The idea that, oh my God, what if she's not popular in a week? That doesn't seem like a pressure to a 45-year-old. Yep. Okay. But when you are 16 or 17, it's huge.
Well, and this movie taught me as a teenager that popular kids were not happy all the time. It was actually, that was a huge revelation. I mean, it seems so obvious to me now as a 47-year-old, that when you look back and the kids who were the most popular in school, it's a daily struggle to maintain that popularity.
Correct.
And all the eyes are on you. And so in a way, you're living under a microscope, and it's also not fun. You don't know that as a kid. You just think, gosh, if you're the jock or the prom queen, everything in life is just rosy and wonderful.
Correct.
And I learned through this movie that in fact the jock and the prom queen were just as miserable as the other three kids.
Well, and then you also had Anthony Michael Hall played the brainy kid.
Uh-huh.
And here is this pressure. And again, several of them were getting pressure from their parents.
Yes.
To either excel at what they're doing already or maintain what they're doing already.
Yeah.
And
the boys.
The fear.
Emilio Estevez and Anthony Michael Hall, that was really their story.
That was a
they
huge
had
thing.
Very demanding parents.
And the idea that if I make one mistake, I'm going to have to deal with stuff. But it was also you got to, what you see on the outside. Judd Nelson's character was this tough guy that you think nobody's going to fuck with him. But apparently his father beat him all the time.
Yes.
So that's what he had to deal with. So no wonder he's angry when he comes to school.
Yeah.
So again, I think what it did was open the eyes of people. And I think that's why it was so popular, is that people could relate. And I'm glad that African-American gay little boy could relate to somebody because I think it was that important a movie. Certainly at the time it was.
Now, we've talked about what makes it great. Let's also talk about what makes it not so great when you're looking at it 3 decades later.
Oh, yeah.
2 things, really. One, the glaring whiteness of the cast would just not be done if it were done today.
There would be no reason to do it now. It would make no sense.
Well, there'd be more to explore. You'd set it in a more diverse high school. You would have some people of color there, and they would talk about the fact that, what the hell do you know? You're white. I mean, that would just that would totally come up.
Exactly.
And in a way, it's sad that it didn't come up then, but I don't think John Hughes necessarily had the worldview to do that.
Correct.
There was also a crotch shot in The Breakfast Club. At one point, Judd Nelson's character is under a desk hiding because he's not supposed to be there. He's supposed to be in solitary at this moment. He's been misbehaving, and the mean, sadistic teacher puts him into a broom closet by himself. He sneaks back into the library. When the teacher comes back in, he hides under the desk, and from his point of view, you see a camera shot right up Molly Ringwald's thighs into her underwear. Now, I learned in this essay that she wrote, that was not her.
No.
Because as a minor, you couldn't film that shot.
No.
Nonetheless, we are looking at, if you're just in the world of the movie, here's a high school junior or senior, let's take a look at her crotch and ogle it for a second.
Yes.
But then he actually moves his head into between her knees to try to get, even though he's trying to hide, she closes her legs, hits his head. I mean, it's a non-consensual sexual act, and it's a little weird to watch. And think it's funny. It's played for comedy. That's the thing about it.
It is played, and that was a lot of the misogyny and all the jokes and that sort of thing were completely played for comedy, and that's how you got away with it.
Yeah.
It's just funny, and they're just kids, and so no harm, no foul.
And she's mad, and she slaps him.
Right? He gets it back, and you're like,
not really,
not really.
And she notes in this essay that when he's not sexually demeaning her, he is constantly calling her Queenie, referring to her as pathetic. He's mad for a lot of reasons.
He was a bully the whole time because he bullied Anthony Michael Hall's character. He tried Emilio Estevez, but they were both kind of fighty people. So.
Well, and Emilio's a better fighter. As soon as he learned that Emilio actually could kick his ass and would, he backed off of that one.
But he was a bully.
Yeah, he was, and that's fine. And I think it's interesting to explore that. Except that he's the bully who is awful to Molly Ringwald the entire movie, and then she's his girlfriend at the end.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. I mean, I think, the song, Don't You Forget About Me, which Simple Minds, which was recorded for, it is iconic, and it was recorded for the movie, and it makes so much sense. Listen to the lyrics. It is that movie. But I think the idea, who knows? Are they really going to talk to each other the next Monday?
I was just about to bring that up. That is the central kind of mystery of the whole movie. Anyone who's ever seen it, we could spend an hour just talking about that, which we won't. But the whole idea is that, about 3/4 of the way through the movie, Anthony Michael Hall says, "Are we all friends now?" And Molly's the one who says, "To be honest, I don't think so. When we get back to school, all of our other friends are going to be around, and it's not going to be okay for us to just mix and mingle. These cliques are really powerful." And then other stuff happens. And in the last quarter of the movie, Molly gets together with Judd. Allie gets together with Emilio. Of course, the brain has to just write an essay by himself. There's no love interest for him to snuggle up to, which I didn't enjoy as a brainy kid watching this movie. I thought that was really unfair. But yeah, I mean, they're all leaving and the song is playing and, you know, these romances have started to bloom. And are they going to be friends? Are they going to be the Breakfast Club that just sits at their own table at the cafeteria and just says, fuck all of you with all of your stuff? That's a nice fantasy.
And I think that when I watched it back in the day, it was like, isn't that great? The walls came down and now they can all be friends. But now looking back, I'm like, hell no.
No. Monday is going to be exactly the way Molly described it.
Exactly.
And
Monday is going to be just like Friday.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
And it works both ways, which I think is another reason why it's a great movie.
Exactly. And as far as relationships go, again, not as far as culture and being diverse and all that goes, but as far as relationships with teenagers, I think it's still spot on and works really, really well.
So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Pretty in Pink, the third installment of the Hughes Ringwald trilogy.
So I really like the song that Orchestra Maneuvers in the Dark did, but I wish if I could have sung it, I would have, just like I did at the opening one.
If you leave,
that's it.
Don't come back.
Yeah.
Please don't take my heart away. Don't come back. Please don't take my heart away. Like that?
Wow.
Yeah.
No, not like that. I wouldn't have done that at all. So Pretty in Pink was 1986. There was 1984, 16 Candles, 1985, Breakfast Club. So basically we were getting a John Hughes a year. And did actually.
John Hughes,
several.
Molly Ringwald, boom, 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 big done.
And this was written and I believe maybe even produced by John Hughes, but it was directed by Howard Deutsch.
Very first movie.
But I will tell you,
and John Hughes is looking over his shoulder the whole time.
Feels like a John Hughes directed
Yes, and the
movie.
shadow of John Hughes was on set every single day, and he was making a John Hughes movie.
He really was.
Yeah.
And which is why it was John Hughes' name over the title, and that's what got people in there. And then, but it was a fun movie. In 1986, we enjoyed it. Molly Ringwald, as we said, it's part of her trilogy too.
Is Andy, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks.
She is from the wrong side of the catch, but she can sew. She knows her way around a sewing machine.
Oh, she makes some 80s looking clothes. I mean, the wardrobe in this, the costume design really should have won an Oscar. I'm sure it wasn't even nominated. It should have, because it really, you talk about that particular moment in American fashion, it nailed it. And yes, if you watch as any millennials who watch this movie, yes, we wore that shit to high school. We looked like that.
We did. But back at 16 Candles, I remember the opening scenes when the people are going into the high school and all that. That was very, very real too.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is what people really look like.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to a fantasized version.
Yep.
And I think, again, what we're talking about, John Hughes was trying to not make a fantasy, but to say this is reality. Okay, so John Cryer plays her best friend.
Yep. Now, it was originally going to be Robert Downey Jr. was going to play Ducky.
I know, and you know why it wasn't? No. She said, I find him too attractive. I couldn't see him as a brother figure.
Well, wait
a minute. But
the original script, they were supposed to get together.
But it didn't. Right. And so they did. Okay, so here's the thing. But that was... I forget. I know that the reason was that he was too attractive.
I just watched a little featurette last night about the ending. So do you want me to tell you the story?
Well, let's say the cast first. Can we go back? Okay. All right. So John Cryer.
As Ducky.
Her best friend. Andrew McCarthy as the love interest.
Blaine. Of course his name was Blaine.
Annie Potts as her boss and one of her best friends
at the record
as her
store.
boss at the record store. Of course, she worked at the record store.
Iona was her name.
And James Spader, who was supposed to be the love interest. But he said, I would rather play the bad guy.
Yeah, he was a great asshole.
He was he played it so many times.
Nobody plays a slithery asshole
better than James Spader. But I will tell you right now, in the 80s, nobody was better looking than James Spader. If you only know him from Blacklist on TV right now, have you seen James? Are you kidding me?
Oh, you can't see my face right now. I am horrified.
He was hot as balls.
No,
Are you kidding me?
So many men were so much more attractive than James
Spader. I loved him.
And he played too many jerks. That was the other thing.
But he was so good looking.
You are a Slytherin. You are. Jesus, listen to you.
Anyway, so James Spader was he played the love interest, Andrew McCarthy's best friend, but he also liked Molly Ringwald's character, but she wouldn't give him the time of day because he was an asshole. He was a cliche rich asshole, which was huge in the 80s.
Yes.
They were always like in Revenge of the Nerds, whatever. They were always
He was what Jake in 16 Candles could have been, but wasn't. That's what I mean by Jake being decent. He was that rich guy whose dad had a Rolls Royce and he thought that was no big deal, who could have been that asshole but wasn't. James Spader was that asshole.
So the plot here is basically they're seniors in high school and they're either finding or losing love in preparation for the final prom. That's basically
the climactic scene is prom night.
And interestingly enough, so if you look at the plots for these three movies, they're just very simplistic just on paper.
Yes.
And that's the whole point, is that, the baby boomers can look at this and go, this is what, teenagerdom is. And what John Hughes was saying was, it goes deeper than that. There are way more layers.
I tell you, the biggest problem in your life at any given moment is the biggest problem in your life. And so if you're a teenager and, what really is weighing on your emotional soul is no one going to ask me to prom?
It's huge.
Then that's huge at that moment. And so they played it seriously. I mean, they didn't play that for laughs. They actually took the lives of teenagers seriously for the first time. And Molly would argue, and I think I would agree, we're not taking the lives of teenagers very seriously right now.
No, we're not, clearly. Every day.
In pop culture.
Fucking day. I'm sorry, I got off on that one.
But I mean, that's something that we're not necessarily...
No. Because we have stuff on the CW, Pretty Little Liars, and even Ridge, what is it?
Riverdale.
I mean, come on.
But that's it's soap opera. Heightened reality. It's soap opera. It's not the real minutia of kids' lives.
But it's soap opera, but that's what we're putting out there. Yeah. And so it's not taken seriously.
One more little thing, if I could say, about The Breakfast Club that we missed that I really wanted to point out, because it's something that when watching it in 2018, my jaw hit the floor because I totally forgot that Anthony Michael Hall had a gun hidden in his locker. You remember that?
Yes, I do now.
And so
now
that was this thing that was one of those 2018 going, I am experiencing this moment so much differently. Yes. And all the kids around that little circle immediately went to, he was trying to commit suicide.
And that's where I went to. When I first saw it. Back
then. But that was pre-Columbine, pre-Sandy Hook, pre-Parkland. Now, as soon as I heard he had a gun in his locker, I'm like, this motherfucker's going to shoot up the school. Well, I immediately went to school shooter. As opposed to, and it was just this really,
but that's
the
21st
world
century.
Has changed. Yes, it's 1985 versus now.
Correct. And you're exactly right. Now that's a whole different game.
Yeah.
So Pretty in Pink is my least favorite of the three.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And part of it is because it was a prom thing. It was about the prom, and I did feel like James Spader, as good looking as he was, shut up, Eric. He was a cliche. He was very much a cliche. He was that guy. Mm-hmm. Name something that is a douchey move. James Spader's character was doing it or saying it. Yeah. And it was like, okay, get it. You're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Andrew McCarthy was too much of a weenie for me in this one. I didn't care for, I didn't relate. I was like, I don't have a crush on you. You're not, whatever.
Well, again, to me, the fundamental flaw of this movie is that the original script was all about how Andy finds happiness with Ducky at the end. Mm-hmm. And everything was leading up to that. And in this little featurette that they made about the original ending, Molly Ringwald said, now, if Robert Downey Jr. had gotten this role, I think that could have worked.
Yes, exactly.
But when John was cast, as adorable as he was, we had more of a friend chemistry. And the character was also based on Molly's real best friend at the time, who, surprise, surprise, grew up and came out of the closet.
Sure.
And so Ducky reads gay to me now. Absolutely. He's a little closeted kid in high. I mean, there's the things
watching
he says
it now.
yeah.
It was very and how he dresses
Yep.
and how he feels when he's laying on her bed at one point,
Yep.
talking about she loves me, she doesn't love me, whatever, all that. It felt very much closeted.
Yeah.
Gay boy.
Yeah. And so the new ending gave him this girl who's flirting with him at the dance. So at least to say his life is not over.
Thank you, John Hughes, because the boys got to get some.
Yeah.
I mean,
but Anthony Alcohol didn't get near the end of the Breakfast Club, and I'm still bitter about that. But, Ducky got, a love interest-ish at the end of the movie. I still watch this movie and go, yeah, he grows up to be gay. But, that was the thing is that at the end of the film, they shoehorned in this scene where Andy and Blaine get together and find happiness because test audiences hated the original ending.
Did not like her ending up with Ducky.
They booed the movie. And I always thought she should have, as a kid, I thought she should have ended up with Ducky as well because Ducky loved her and Blaine was kind of just using her throughout the entire movie. However, John Cryer actually was the one who convinced me that the new ending was better. In this little featurette, he said, as an adult, a good 15 years later, he said, if you make a movie about love across class lines, it better work. Otherwise, what are you saying? You're saying something kind of disturbing.
Right.
You're saying that people cannot ever find love across these differences. And so it had to work out that way from a human standpoint as well as just these characters and having it make sense.
I also had an issue on that last scene because Andrew McCarthy had cut his hair after filming because they tacked this on.
Yes,
and so he was
playing
a
soldier in some movie he was doing, so he had a crew cut.
And so they put on a wig, which you can tell it's a wig, and it's an awful wig.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I remember going, what the hell is on his head? And that's all I thought about in that last scene. Even in 1986, I was out. It was an awful, awful wig, and it wasn't believable. And, but again, for me, her father was Harry Dean Stanton.
Yep.
Who was wonderful.
He was great.
And I thought...
Second billing, actually. All this talk about this love triangle, it was starring Molly Ringwald, Harry Dean Stanton.
I thought that was a very lovely relationship between the two of them, and we got to see quite a bit of it.
Yep.
And you learned about that her mother had left. And again, this is about you can't judge a book by its cover.
Yep.
And so we got to see a little bit more in depth. We did not get to see anything in depth of the rich kids.
No. But again,
and I think that's a problem.
It wasn't written to have her end up with the rich kid. So I think now that we have the ending we might have wanted to know a little bit more about Blaine's inner life. But, we don't. The movie that they were making was not about that.
That's true.
One thing I will say about Pretty in Pink that makes me not... I don't know if any of these are my least favorite. I think 16 Candles is certainly the most problematic. And so from a 2018 standpoint, it's probably my least favorite of the three. One thing that Pretty in Pink really has going for it is Annie Potts. I love her in this movie.
She is wonderful.
She's so funny. I mean, she's just there to be a sounding board for Molly Ringwald, but boy, she created a character out of nothing and is, and has that kind of great nasally New York accent that sometimes she employs, even though she's in Chicago. We don't know where she came from. It doesn't matter. She is delightful, and probably of all of the kind of, you compare her to the sidekick in 16 Candles, who kind of disappears into the background.
Yeah,
she kind of barely registers. Boy, Annie Potts lets you know that she's there, and yet doesn't take away from the movie.
Not at all.
She's just part of the delightful fabric of this whole thing.
It was a very, very good casting move on their part, and I completely enjoyed her. And had I would have taken that part. That's a fun part.
Yeah.
That's a fun part.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing a teen movie, and I'm the sidekick at the boss at the record store? Yeah.
But I also get to be an adult. That's the other thing about this particular sidekick thing is that when Andy's saying, should I go to prom? And she's like, oh, go. And she's speaking as an adult who's like, yeah, you have nothing to lose. You should go. But instead of just saying you should go, she tells this long, fantastic story about her friend who every once in a while has a moment of existential crisis. But I think it was just an after effect of skipping the prom. It's just, and I don't know how much of that was written for her and how much of that she improv.
Well, apparently,
because it sounds so much like her.
Also, John Cryer apparently did a lot of improv.
Yeah.
A lot of his lines in this movie are just shit he made up.
Yeah. And I can believe it. I
totally believe it. He's
very
a funny
natural.
guy.
Yes.
So, again, John Hughes had some themes.
Uh-huh.
a lot of it was from very much, as we have hammered and kicked this dead horse, white, Anglo-Saxon, middle-class America, straight, that's where he's coming from.
I think if Pretty in Pink were remade today, it would probably be love across color lines as well as class lines.
Agree.
I think that would be more interesting today.
Yes, and could work. It could totally work. Yeah. But it was teens, loneliness, finding their place.
Yep.
That to me was a big theme, is finding, where is it do I fit in?
And finding your people, being able to forge relationships across these differences. Even in 16 Candles, she was probably solidly middle class. The object of her affection was clearly upper class. I mean, there was a Rolls Royce in the garage.
Lower upper class, I would say.
There was a Rolls Royce in the garage.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not. I didn't know that kid in high school. So for me, that was like, even when I watched it as a high schooler, I was like, that's richer than anybody I know.
Yeah.
And so there was a distinction there to be made.
But I think that, as we said, he took teenagers seriously when nobody else was in movies and in art. But I do think we need to keep in mind that it was very much, this was white America. Yeah. And so I think that is what is missing. Mm-hmm. And that, unfortunately, is what will keep it from being, it will always keep it dated.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is ever going to look at these movies and think, oh, this could have been made yesterday. As period pieces, and I think for me, it was The Breakfast Club is probably my favorite of the three, because it is so different. I think it still plays. It still works. It's 1985. And it looks 1985 and it sounds 1985 and, everything about it just screams the 80s. And yet I find it really, really watchable. It's interesting. I have a couple of friends who are quite a bit younger than me. They're millennials. They'd never heard of this movie until I mentioned it in this past week. They never heard of it. And I can't wait to show it to them. I mean, I'm wondering how they're going to like it, although I was looking forward to showing them Heather's as well, and they hated it. So who knows? Okay. Who knows?
All right. But yeah, I think that, as you said, the music, he put his soundtracks for these three movies especially are all amazing.
And they get better and better and better. The Pretty in Pink soundtrack really figured it out. So good.
Yeah,
it
really
was
is
nonstop. I mean, the Pretty in Pink soundtrack was I had the cassette.
Of course you did.
And it played nonstop. And I remember this because, when the CD hit, for all you little kids out there listening, back when you had cassette tapes, it was hard to find your favorite song on the album. And when you found a cassette where every single song was good, it was such a treasure. That's why mixtapes were so great.
Exactly.
Because you could make sure all the songs were good.
Exactly.
Filler songs on cassette tapes were the worst because you had to fast forward through them, but then not too far.
Okay.
Everything on Pretty in Pink was great.
One thing that was worse than the cassette was the 8-track. I just want to throw that out to you. And that was before you, probably.
At least on the 8-track, though, you could skip to the next track and you could skip
but it was
3
just a
songs.
chunk. Okay, we won't go down that road.
But anyway... We don't worry about this today with your fancy schmancy iPods.
But as I said, I think that John Hughes, and again, the art versus the artist kind of issues are there, but I think that he's definitely, these are iconic. These are legendary. I'm putting that in quotes. You get me. It's not
Tell you, The Breakfast Club just got accepted into the Criterion Collection. I think that's actually a huge.
But I think they're worth. I do think they're worth watching.
I do.
And I think that the writing, how these kids talk, again, was also it was different. It was new, and that is also what helped it.
And to be clear, Molly never says in her essay anywhere that he behaved badly towards her. There was never any groping or weird stuff or even sexual innuendo on the set. All of her issues really had to do with the way he framed women and girls and the lack of other kinds of diversity in his writing and in the way that he put movies out there. And so there was nothing. He's not a monster. Right. He's not a Hitchcock.
He's not. It's just a matter of it was the sign of the times. Yep. It was very much the sign of the times. But he was while he wasn't making necessarily a stand for women's issues or diversity, he was making a stand for that particular generation.
Yeah, and he was, again, we made this point, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but he was taking girls seriously in a way that no one ever had. So of his time, could you say he was a feminist? Maybe. And yet feminism has changed so much in those last 3 decades that now we look at it and say, I don't necessarily blame John Hughes or think John Hughes is a horrible person. I was like, wow, the collective were just really fucked up in the 80s when it came to this whole idea of, respecting women as people on the same level as we gave men that automatic respect.
He did show that a woman can make, the movie, it was Molly Ringwald. That's why people went to see it.
Yeah.
It was before Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
She was the reason people went to see this.
And I don't know that we can, because I think people have forgotten because it was such a quick flash of time. It was really this 3 years between 1984 and 1986, but she was huge.
She was everywhere.
I mean, she was the it girl of that chunk of the 80s. Not even the entire 1980s, not even the entire
decade.
She
was part of the Brat Pack.
And you know what? I missed her in St. Elmo's Fire. St. Elmo's Fire came out, and it was another Brat Pack movie, and Judd Nelson was in it, and Emilio Estevez was in it, and Ali Sheedy. 3/5 of the Breakfast Club were there, and I was like, "Where's Molly?" Like, I really I wanted her there. Yeah. I wanted her instead of Demi Moore, quite frankly.
That's a whole nother show.
So final diagnosis about these. See them. I would say, personally, The Breakfast Club, you should see it because a movie like it was never made before, and I don't think another movie quite like it has ever been made since. It's not something that actually prompted a whole bunch of really bad remakes and ripoffs. It's a really fantastic film. And just go into it knowing that you're going to see a lot of white people problems. And that hearing that story about Molly's black gay friend who said, I think this movie saved my life, was like, oh, wow. Because it had a huge impact on me as a kid. I was 14 when it came out, and it was huge for me as well. My final diagnosis is I do think John Hughes was important to cinema, to moviedom, and I mean this is iconic 80s stuff. I think that if you're going to watch them all, if you're not going to watch them all, Breakfast Club is the one to pull out. But if you are going to watch them all, watch them in order. Because I do think you will see Molly getting better each time. But I also think there's kind of a story arc. I mean, there's kind of an arc with how whoever she's playing as a character, each character is like a little bit more enlightened. So that Pretty in Pink's Andy is light years away from where Samantha in 16 Candles is. And so it's kind of fun to see that. But, again, I think John Hughes is important. And I think that we do need to remember that who he was in the history of movies and popular culture. Yep. So see them. And if nothing else, get the damn soundtrack. Oh, my God. So great. Before we leave you, thank you for sticking to the end. This is Popperation. I am Eric. I'm Stacey. And we're on Facebook and Twitter, and our website is poperationroom.com, and we're everywhere you can find podcasts. The most important thing you could do if you love the show is tell your friends. Word of mouth is really the best way for us to get. And we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking. Are we doing stuff you'd like to hear? Is there something that you'd like us to talk about? Are we wrong? Have we said something wrong? At us. Bring it on. Bring it on.
You've been listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Popperation Room. Check out our website at popperationroom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.